Well, hey guys, today we are going to talk about home buying in a seller-friendly market. So we are in a seller-friendly market. We've been in a seller-friendly market for quite a few years, but 2020 has turned into an extremely seller-friendly market. And we talked about that last week as we were talking about inventory and what that means for you. So there's some unique aspects to being a buyer in a seller-friendly market and things that you need to think about. So here are the four topics I'm going to touch on today briefly, and I've entitled it "Buying When the Seller Holds the Cards." So number one, deals. So there are those of you out there who always want a deal, and you probably know who you are. If you're paying asking price, you feel like you're getting swindled. You want a discount. So I'm going to invite you to rethink what a bargain is in a seller-friendly market first. Number two, value. How do you think about buying value? Number three, perspective. And I'm going to invite you to think both short-term and long-term when you buy. And then four, how to prepare to be a buyer in this market. So let's talk about getting a deal. And really, when most of you hear getting a deal, what you mean is getting a bargain or buying something for cheaper than what somebody's asking for it. And so the question I would just pose to you is cheap best? And when it comes to buying a house, rarely is cheap best. There's a reason. If a home is cheap, there's a reason it's cheap. And if there's a home that's been on the market a long time, there's generally a good reason it's been on the market a long time. So the question that I would ask yourself is, if you see a home that you think is a perceived value in a seller-friendly market where homes are flying off the market quickly, why didn't other people want that house? So that's something that you need to be thinking about. Paying full price, I know that that's a sin to some of you. And so when inventory is as low as it is here, most people are going to end up paying close to full price, if not full price or more for a house that they buy. So one thing that I would say to you and to anybody else who's in that situation or even in their bidding war and might have to pay more than asking price is demand now for a home is the best indicator of future demand. So what I mean by that is if you're buying a home where there's 6 or 7 different families bidding on that home now, that means there's a better chance that in the future, when you go to sell it, there's going to be demand for the home. But the opposite's also true. If the home is not attracting people now, there's probably not going to be demand for the home in the future unless you do things to make it more appealing, right? Which goes into considering all variables. So number one, why haven't other people offered? Number two, do you have the relevant construction experience to take on something like this? Everybody wants to take on a fixer-upper because of the shows. Rarely is that as glamorous as it sounds. And if you don't have the experience, it can end up being a big problem for you. And so I call it the 50% rule. You need to consider the 50% rule. And that 50% rule is simply this. The project that you want to take on is probably going to cost 50% more than you think it's going to. It's going to take 50% longer than you think it's going to. And if you take those things into account, you still feel good about it, go for it. But I would just caution you to think about that and think wisely. So two, buy value. So instead of thinking about what's the best bargain I could get or how cheap can I get a home, I want to invite you to think about getting the most value in a home. So you can get value in 2 different ways. You can either buy value, meaning you're going to pay, maybe you pay a little bit more for the home that's already valuable, meaning it's appealing, it's in a good area, it's got good bones, it's got good improvements. Or you can create value. So you can buy a home where you have the opportunity to make improvements to create value, but that's going to cost money and time. So you need to take that into account. So know thyself. That's point number 2 here. Know thyself. Number 1, do you have the time, energy, and expertise to pull this off? Right? So ripping out carpet and painting the walls is one thing. Removing walls, reorienting floor plans, adding on to homes, that's something you really need to know what you're getting yourself into, right? Do you want to live with the mess? If you're going to take on a project, are you going to live in the house? Are you going to move out while it's being done? If you live in it, know that dust is getting everywhere, right? So just know if you can handle that. And then do you want to deal with the consequences, right? Do you want to deal with hey, we just opened up the walls and we found there's a big electrical issue or there's termite problems, right? Things that didn't get caught on an inspection. So just know that if you choose to create value in a home, Those are some things you're going to have to take into account. And then don't roll the dice. So the biggest way I see people rolling dice is going, hey, this is a really nice home. The area is okay, but I think it's on the upswing. It'll probably, turn into a really, really booming area in the next couple of years. And then our property value is going to go through the roof. Bad idea. Don't do it. Neighborhoods don't turn over and get nice or get appealing in like 2 years. That's a long-term process. You don't want to bank on that as a strategy. And then the second thing is a home is worth what someone's willing to pay for it. So if you are like assuming that in the future somebody's going to love this house, but nobody did this time around, that's rolling the dice, right? If it's out on the market 100 days, chances are if you don't do anything to it, it's probably going to sit on the market a long time next time through too. Okay. Third, perspective. I want you to think short-term and long-term. And what I mean by that is this. Okay. Could you sell this house tomorrow? Right? So this is the short-term piece. Most families, when they come to me, they're like, yeah, we want to live in this house for 5 to 7 years, or this is our forever home. Okay. That's awesome. And I hope that that's the case. But for most of you, life happens. You have another baby, you get a new job, right? So is the home desirable in its current condition? And do folks want to live in the neighborhood that this house is in now? So if you had to, like, you're not planning on it, but if you had to in a year, put this home on the market, is it desirable the way it is? Or do you have to do a ton to it? And if so, are you willing to do that right away? Right? I just don't want you to get stuck. Okay. So that's thinking the short-term piece. Here's the long-term piece. If you ended up needing to live in this house for longer, if you plan to live in it for a couple of years, but you end up having to live in it for 5 to 7 years, will you be happy here? Or are there things that you just hate about it that you're just like settling for? Never settle when you're buying a house. Never settle. Now, you're not going to get perfect. The 10 out of 10 house doesn't exist. But you also, this is a big purchase. Do not settle because it's a seller's market and homes are flying off the market. And it's really hard to find a house right now. You don't want to settle either. So you want to be in the best of both worlds with that, right? Find that middle ground there. So play the short game and the long game. Okay, lastly, when it's a seller's market and you're a buyer, you have to go in with a plan. Okay, so those with a plan are going to win. Those who do not have a plan will miss out on at least a couple of houses before they finally get their act together. This is my experience. That's why I always talk to my buyers about having a plan before we go out and start looking at homes. And this is what I mean by having a plan. When you see a home that has just hit the market and you love it and you want it, I want you to know what your best offer is going in, right? So here's what I mean by that. What is the top of your budget that you'd feel comfortable spending without feeling like you're overextending? Okay, what are the variables and things in that offer that you're willing to tinker with? Are you willing to extend a lease back to the seller for them to live in the home for a little while? Are you willing to pay for the title insurance policy? Are you willing to forego getting a home warranty on the house? Are you willing to do a 5-day option period, right? So here are some of the questions that I would have people ask as they're trying to think through this. In bidding wars, I call it creating guardrails, okay? You don't want to regret not going for it, right? You don't want to regret that you were willing to go a little bit higher and you didn't do it, okay? So you don't want to regret not going for it. You also don't want to regret that you went for it so much that you've overextended yourself and now you have buyer's remorse, okay? So what is the sweet spot between those two? Figure that out ahead of time. And then when you get in that situation, you're not making an emotional decision. And then lastly, as we're crafting the offer, put yourself in the seller's shoes. If you were selling this house, what are things that would be appealing to you, right? If it's somebody that's like moving across the nation, would it be helpful for them to have a few days after closing to move out of the house? So giving them a lease back. There are 3 things that a seller thinks about, and they're in this order when they're evaluating offers. Doesn't matter who it is. Here are the 3 things they're thinking about. Money. Okay, so how much money am I going to walk away with? Like, what is my net money? Number 1. Risk. How sure am I that I'm getting that amount of money, right? So that's why cash is generally more appealing than a finance offer because there are less variables and things that could fall apart, right? So how much money am I getting? How sure am I that I'm getting that money? And then ease. How easy is this going to be for me, right? So not all offers are created equal. If you have 2 offers, both are like $300,000, but one is a cash offer with a 2-week closing. And the other one is a financed offer that closes in a month with a minimum down payment. They're going to take the cash offer all day long, right? So those are the 3 things we need to think about. How much money? What is the risk to the seller? And how easy can you make it, right? And if we can address all 3 of those things, there's a very, very good chance that we're going to win if we're in a bidding war, okay? Which there are a lot of right now. Not every home, but there are a lot of. So keeping that in mind, hope this was helpful. If you haven't